All right. Hi, everybody. It's our CFB Talk 159. It's Tuesday night. This is when we talk to you. It's always live. We always like to hear your calls and see what you want to talk about. So I just fired off that tweet to let you know how to join us. You can always hit request from the Twitter app. I'll let you up here and we'll hear whatever you'd like to talk about in college football. Week 4 is back behind us. It's been an interesting one. A lot of entertaining stories going on. There's a couple of little ones I actually want to mention at the outset. But again, if you'd like to join the conversation, hit request. There are a couple of really interesting ones that I don't think some of it got attention, in corners of Twitter, including our own Twitter account. But I can understand maybe not national news. But one of the more interesting stories took place at Division 3 because there was a female, and that's how it's described in all the articles. Female Haley Van Voorhees became the first female non-kicker to play in an NCAA football game. So to be clear, there have been kickers before, certainly. I mean, going all the way back for at least 20 years, we've had kickers at the FBS level and at all divisions. In fact, Jackson State had a kicker. They injured their kicker in earlier season games, and they had a female kicker from the women's soccer team come and do their kickoff. So she was, I believe, the first female kicker in the SWAC. But what happened at Division 3 was interesting because it wasn't ballyhooed. Some people were like, oh, this was staged. This was just to say that a woman played a non-kicking role. No, I actually went back because when we heard it happen, we went back and wanted to clip it. So I actually watched that quarter. It took place in the first quarter. For those who are unfamiliar with Division 3 football, it is the land of just insane mismatches. That's where you'll occasionally see that score line that's like 96-0 or something of that nature. So what happened was Shenandoah, a Division 3 school out in Virginia, was playing a very outmatched school, and it was already in the first quarter 26-0. And going through the first quarter, having heard that it had occurred in the first quarter, it was brutal. They kept accidentally turning it over in their own red zone, the opposing team. So scoring was happening at a rapid pace. So deep in the first quarter, they substituted in Haley Van Voorhees, who plays apparently free safety, but they put her on an edge blitz. And it was interesting because the announcers had no idea who she was. They had no idea it was they just called number 10. They weren't sure who number 10 even was on the roster because she hadn't played yet. She's a junior there, and I guess there was some reporting when she joined the program in 2021. But this was her first play on. She hurried the quarterback. She actually tackled the quarterback. Some people who were, again, people love to just criticize her, like, oh, it was a late tackle, but she was jacked up. You could tell, like, this is her first time to finally start, or at least play in a game. You could see the excitement of her and her teammates when she went on there. But for all the criticism, my goodness, it was Division 3 football, and it was a team that was already down 26-0. There was a reason why the football wasn't necessarily the quality people expected. This was not Ohio State versus Notre Dame. This wasn't Florida State versus Clemson. But it was very interesting to see, and congratulations to Haley for being the first woman to play a non-kicking role in an NCAA football game. And then it was interesting, too. Meanwhile, in Canada, they had their first woman to ever play, the University of Manitoba kicker Maya Turner from out here in Minnesota. She apparently went to Loyola of Chicago and realized she didn't like to play women's soccer, so she found that Manitoba was looking for a kicker. So she not only was the first female kicker in Canada, she won the game eventually. She went 2 for 2 on field goals. Their other field goal kicker in overtime kept missing. So they actually gave her what ended up being the final kick, and she won the game in overtime. So there were a couple of interesting stories in that regard. So I just wanted to hit on a couple of those because there aren't ones that you typically hear about. And I see John is in the audience and wants to be up here, so I'm going to go ahead and let him up. So again, if you'd like to talk about anything in college football, my name's Bob Ekayeri. This is our CFB Talk 159. We always enjoy hearing from you. John, what's going on, man?
Hey, Bob, how you doing tonight?
Good.
Actually, it was pretty cool you mentioned Shenandoah. Actually, you probably already know, but I live in Virginia, so it's pretty cool that we got to see such a small school here in the state on the map. My question for you tonight, I guess now since we hit a good 4 or 5 games into the season, what coach do you think is most on the hot seat and why?
I was just thinking about, especially after the end of Saturday, how Neil Brown had been on the hot seat, but now he's kind of got himself off of it to the West Virginia's winning, but at the same time, it's like to the horror of West Virginia fans who've really wanted to see him go. So at this point, looking at, this is going to be a good call because there's several there's several teams out there that seem to be very disappointed with their head coach right now. I'm not sure, and I'd love to hear your thought on this one because I can think of a few, but John, who's the one that you think is the one most likely to be on their way out?
I mean, I could be really lazy about this and throw a SEC coach in there because I always feel that SEC jobs are always the most impossible jobs. I mean, you're thrown into a conference where the competition never slows down. It's do or die. The fan base is really intense. So I guess I got to look at Florida because I mean it's not looking really hot there so far, and I'm kind of curious of what Florida fans are thinking right now.
But I mean, they have managed to get ranked again. I'm not gonna. I don't know. They after beating Tennessee, I think, especially seeing how they do against Kentucky, dropping against Kentucky would just be unacceptable. And they have a reasonable kind of runway here with Kentucky, a Vanderbilt team that is just as bad as it's ever been, and a South Carolina team that is competitive but clearly isn't quite there yet. Before they square off against Georgia, and I think that's already a rivalry game, but that's going to be, I think, a tall order. So I think maybe again that's another example of a head coach who looked to be in deeper water, especially after that loss at Utah. And I want to give him some credit. I was kind of just going back and thinking, Dave Aranda seems to have some disappointment around it. I don't know if Baylor would ever pull the trigger at this point because again, maybe this season is just an aberration, but the Big 12 for the success it's been having at the top, and obviously we have Oklahoma and Texas and Kansas is managed to get ranked for however long that lasts. I think the shift, at least in disappointment, has been to both of those programs. I mean, Mike Gundy, would be crazy to think of them ever letting him go. But at the same time, this has been a disappointing season for Oklahoma State by all accounts. And Dave Aranda, he's the other one, at least if we're talking about coaches who are kind of eyebrow raising, and I'm concerned about necessarily how they're doing. I mean, it's Pitt's another one. UVA, I'm not sure what kind of they're feeling, but Pat Narduzzi, one of the interesting arguments I heard about Pitt is just watching them find a lack of success once they lost their offensive coordinator. Suddenly, they weren't able to produce like they did, and how much of that was influencing their success. So I wonder if one day we'll see Pitt lose patience with Narduzzi. At this point, I don't have a leader in the bullpen, so to speak, in the dugout.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, and I think Pitt's a really good example of that though, because that's a team that's been pretty disappointing this year. I think maybe even last year, I would say is a little more of a disappointing team, and I think UVA is sort of a special case right now though because of the circumstances that's occurred within the last year. I think even if they keep performing like this, I think it's a tough call to essentially get rid of your coach that essentially took you through that, an unimaginable situation as such. But I think, yeah, the only reason I say Florida is just because, it's SEC fan bases are just can be unrealistic sometimes. Even when your team is playing well, it doesn't feel that the fan base supports you anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's see here. We have Jack up here too. I wanted to give you an opportunity. What's on your mind, Jack?
Hey, Bob. First off, thanks for having me on. And I want to give a shout out to John. Great question, and even better profile picture he has over there. Dude, the Hey Arnold. You just love to see it. But I'm with you guys real quick. Pat Narduzzi. I mean, remember how when the whole Mel Tucker situation first kicked off, we're all looking at, hey, Pat might want to go over to East Lansing, give it a go. Now, man, I mean, he's in the hot seat over there in the ACC. I mean, just tough schedule. First off, Cincy going to Morgantown to play at West Virginia, and then a pretty good UNC team that not a lot of people are talking about. I think he's on the hot seat, and I think it might be a bit unfair. Um, that said, Bobby, real quick, I want to give you a quick question. Is first off, is this live? Is this every Tuesday at 10? Is that the
That's what we try to do. I think we're gonna not do one on Halloween night because I got kids. I can't do that. And we didn't do one on the 4th of July. This has been like the year where everything just times out. But Yeah, if I can do it, and it's been, I think, all but that one 4th of July this year. Yeah, we do these every Tuesday night at 10 p.m. It's fun. Sweet. It's live. It's interesting to do and have a chat with folks.
Yeah, man, and all across our beautiful game of college football, that's a beautiful thing. That's something that our CFB does so well, is that unites people all across this game of ours. No matter if it's Alabama to the Zips to Canadian college football, D3, whatever it is, we love it here, and I love that. We actually just finished recording a podcast. I'm not gonna plug it. I don't want to be rude or anything, but we end up talking about all FBS teams, kind of our spiel, talking about all 133, soon to be 134 FBS teams in every episode. So it's actually, we do that every Tuesday. So it's brilliant that right afterwards, you have your show, and that's great. So
Kennesaw State. It's going to be Kennesaw State. That's 134, isn't it? Yes. See, again, that's after my heart. I love that kind of trivia, and that's great.
Yeah,
but oh my goodness, I love learning new things. Like I swear, this weekend, because again, we always look at some of the squirrelier things like college football across the world. And I knew that Arkansas State, for whatever reason, there was like I don't know if he was a billionaire, but some really, really rich entrepreneur, businessman in Mexico paid to basically build an Arkansas State campus in Mexico, in like central Mexico. So they play Red Wolves. They don't even call them they don't even change the name into Spanish. It is the Arkansas State Red Wolves. But beautiful. I put up the latest standings there because it's amusing once in a while to say, hey, there's an Arkansas State in Mexico. And somebody noticed Incarnate Word now has a campus in Mexico playing football. And I did not know that. And I feel stupid because I put up the standings. I didn't pay attention that the team at the bottom had the UIW logo. And there you go, Incarnate Word, So, I mean, the sport is growing. And again, like all this stuff, it's great that you guys are doing that. I want to just ask you a question since you reviewed all those games. What is a game that you think people, because everyone was talking about, obviously, Florida State, Clemson, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Colorado, Oregon apparently had the best ratings this week. But what is a game that you think was underappreciated this past week?
Oh, that's tough, friend. And if I could give you a follow-up, that'd be great. That's tough because something that really stood out to me, and we kind of talked about this in our podcast, was pretty much how the old American teams fared in the Big 12. Almost everyone played their first game except for Houston. They played Sam Houston State. And, they all did all right. Oklahoma looks like the number 2 team in the Big 12. They had to go to Nippert, one of the best stadiums in all of college ball. Beautiful, historic venue. And the Bearcats played them tough. And Bearcats have had a great schedule at this point. UCF, without their quarterback Plumlee, went into the Little Apple of Manhattan, Kansas. And, they fought hard. BYU gave up two touchdowns off of turnovers to the Jayhawks in Lawrence. These are all going to be pretty good teams in the Big 12. I think the newbies, but their first round wasn't, as John mentioned. Baylor got some issues. They weren't against Baylor. They weren't against Texas Tech, who I had high hopes going into this year, and they haven't hit it. They were against teams that are going to be fighting for probably that second spot in the Big 12 championship. Hopefully they can take down Oklahoma. I mean, K-State, they've been a bit inconsistent. When it comes to the group of 5, for me, being the sicko that I am, UNM and UMass was just, oh God. Oh,
wow. That definitely qualifies.
Oh man. Tulsa at NIU was a great one as well.
I am really looking forward to seeing who comes out in the lead in the Mountain West. I just wanted to put that out there. With Fresno State Air Force, and it seems like Wyoming. Wyoming's one loss is to that Texas game where they were tied until late. Yeah, those 3 have been. Wyoming's probably the most unexpected of the 3. I think Fresno State Air Force, people were expecting them to be challengers. Boise State's been disappointing, and clearly the teams there have a puncher's chance. San Diego State's been disappointing. Actually, I should say that's another head coach.
Agreed.
Everyone seems to be pointing at Brady Hoke. This might be the end for him over there on his second time at San Diego State. His first time was where he was able to then get the Michigan job. But I'm not. I think it's an interesting conference to see there, especially among the G5. And then UNLV. I mean, it's a little early, but to see them, it was Vandy, but still Barry Odom was an interesting hire. I don't think I remember when they hired the old Mizzou head coach, and everyone was kind of surprised. But he seems to be doing the right things in UNLV, which, especially after they moved into, after they got to share that stadium, when the legislature forced the Raiders to share Allegiant with UNLV, there was no reason why. This gives them that opportunity to be a true, potentially that, again, a sleeping giant in the Mountain West. But now having a coach that could potentially get them to that level would be striking. John, I see your hands up. Did you want to add something to this?
Yeah, I just want to jump in on about we talked about this past weekend. I'm really excited for this Saturday for a game I never ever in a million years will ever figure out to be excited for. Duke and Notre Dame playing each other on Saturday might be one of the better games this weekend, and I cannot believe I'm still saying that out loud. But I think that spells a really potential good game.
Game Day certainly agreed with you. So, I mean, I think that's definitely one of those. And it's always exciting when a school that's never hosted Game Day gets an opportunity to. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how that is. And, sure, Notre Dame came off that very close loss and counting problem they had with Ohio State, but I think they didn't look terrible, and if they win out, and that's a big if because they've got some tough games, not only Duke but USC except at all. If they can win out, they're still going to have a shot, at least outside shot, at being in the playoff. That was one of those games with Ohio State where both teams could easily. I mean, obviously Ohio State takes the edge for obvious reasons, but Notre Dame still keeps themselves at least in the outside of the discussion. It wasn't one where they took themselves completely out of it. Jack, I know you wanted to add something to that.
Yeah, I'm with John. I think it's a great matchup. I think it's interesting that Game Day's following Notre Dame 2 weeks in a row. But first off, I mean, yeah, we all know how great of a game that was. 10 men on the field for the last play of the game. Absolutely brutal, heartbreaking.
Last two plays of the game, no
last
less.
two, they took a timeout. Oh man, and you can't call back-to-backs timeouts. It's just brutal. I just real quick, I want to say hey to my friends Noah and Mr. Economy in the chat. I know you guys see me there. We are long-suffering FAU Owls, but just yeah.
Before you leave, I got to ask, what do you think of Tom Herman so far?
Tough. He was able to keep the team mostly together. Laramie Cannon entered our star running back, entered the portal, took his name out, and trust me when I say that he could play just about anywhere. But we had some serious issues. Casey Thompson, I mean, God bless him, tore his ACL at Clemson. I mean, his career might be over. Tough luck. The former Cornhusker and Texas Longhorn quarterback. After Clemson, I mean, it looked like we were going to be on our fourth running back going into Illinois last week. Wide receiver, Burton was hurt, so you now have LaJohntay Wester, who's really kind of taken the mantle. LaJohntay Wester now leads all of FBS ball in receptions, mind you. And defensively, we had a lot of injuries, man. Just injuries everywhere, and it's been tough. But Tom Herman, he seems to be doing great. Willie Taggart beforehand. Wish him all the best. Just didn't work out. But it's kind of hard to follow Lane Kiffin and everything that he did in paradise, as we call it. So, not where we want to be. We're really hoping to be there or thereabouts in the American, especially considering our schedule this year was pretty easy. We haven't played a conference game yet. You never know, but if you don't mind, Bobby, and I can see, Tin Horn wants to talk, and John as well, I think. But I was going to ask what y'all think about the top G5 teams. If you guys had to pick 5 right now, and Bobby, you mentioned Fresno, and you mentioned Air Force. Air Force is undefeated, 4-0. They won 9 straight, all by double digits. All right, and I don't think I heard of a team that's done that well that hasn't gotten enough respect like Air Force has. And beyond that, I couldn't even tell you who else is in my top 5 for the G5, but I feel like
that's a great question,
right?
And I do, I'm bullish on Fresno State and Air Force. I think Wyoming has proven to be a strong team. I mean, that only loss was to Texas, and they did not look bad in that loss. I think going outside of there, the Americans have been the interesting one because there was so much disappointment with UTSA not and UAB, especially not being exactly where we wanted to see them. FAU, we expected, an adjustment with the new head of coaching regime, so we'll give them a pass. So Tulane is still out there. Memphis looked decent. They lost to Mizzou, but they looked decent doing so. They didn't, roll over. They gave them a challenge, and Mizzou seems to be one of those teams that's hard to peg right now. So I think between those 5 teams or that, and with the Sun Belt, by the way, James Madison's still screwed right now. James Madison cannot qualify for any postseason games. So you get Georgia State right now and Georgia Southern. Both of those two, I'd be curious to see where they're at. I mean, I'm happy to see, just as someone who my allegiance of what it's worth. I went to the University of Southern California, so Clay Helton was I wasn't thrilled by him, but I didn't hate the man, and I'm happy that he seems to be finding a good fit with Georgia Southern. But yeah, Georgia State seems to be the other one that's kind of inexplicable. So I'm kind of looking in those teams right now, but I'd be curious to see. I don't know if there's anyone in Conference USA. You got Liberty, but Liberty's schedule is so incredibly weak. It is. I remember Phil Steele put it 133 out of 133. So no idea how that would ever work out. And I think that's actually a good segue to just also Tin Horn Productions. And we let you up here. I know you're. I see the get at their asses. The GATA at the beginning. What are your thoughts on this and whatever else you wanted to bring up?
So I wanted to talk some Georgia Southern and Sun Belt football. I have tickets to the upcoming Georgia Southern versus Coastal Carolina game. There's only a few hundred tickets left. It's going to be either sold out or near capacity. It's going to be a great game, electric atmosphere. So I'm hoping the Eagles pull out a big victory, get the first win in conference play. It'll be big. We're 3-1 going into this game. Bad loss of Wisconsin. We had a lot of turnovers, but I think that was more of a fluky game than anything else. I think we'll be strong going into the conference play.
Yeah, I agree. That was those turnovers just absolutely killed Georgia Southern at Wisconsin. But I'm very curious to see how not only the Coastal Carolina game, and I know you probably don't want to look far ahead, but the following game, I believe you guys have a bye week, but the following game is at James Madison. And that is going to be one that will, I think, be very interesting as far as Sun Belt fans or just any fans of football, because James Madison right now is undefeated, but they can't play in the title game, so they can't even qualify for the New Year's Six because they can't be a conference champion. And it would be really interesting to see, again, a challenger like Georgia Southern, a classic, powerful program, put that to sleep by just simply beating them in regular season play. But first things first, Coastal Carolina, who looks, Jamie Chadwell's not there. They got a great quarterback, but that running game isn't exactly there for them. I think they're definitely weaker than they were before. So this isn't what people got excited about previously.
Yeah, that's really great for the Eagles offense. Our team looks great this year, top 10 in passing yards, like we were last year. James Brin has been very, very good, except some boneheaded decisions in the Wisconsin game. But I think that was more of the offensive line letting a lot of pressure get to him. He had a lot of sacks that game and ended up switching quarterbacks in garbage time in the fourth quarter. So I don't think that game is representative of how this team has played as a whole. And I believe going into conference play against James Madison, we won that game last year in Paulson Stadium in Statesboro, but we're going to be on the road. So that's going to be a tough one. But our home schedule looks very winnable this year. Coastal does not look like the beast that they have been in the Sun Belt East. I really believe that Georgia Southern could probably go undefeated. We have Old Dominion at home, Georgia State at home. So we're going to have that home field advantage, especially in that Georgia State rivalry game. So it'll be interesting to see, but I think Clay Helton has this team on the right track.
Absolutely. And, I just want to go back to Helton one last second. And I see John and Jack have their hands up, and I'll go to them to hear their input on this. But Helton is like one of those coaches where I was curious, is this just a coach who has talent but is better suited to a program that wasn't USC? It just didn't fit him. And sometimes you'll see coaches that do that. They get promoted. It's a Peter principle, which classic saying. I actually have the book. It was originally a parody. I was able to find an original copy of it. But the Peter principle is you get promoted based on your talent level until you reach a job where you're actually not talented anymore and you're terrible at it. So with Helton, I'm not saying that quite that happens, but you see that in head coaching, particularly with like coordinators. Guy was an amazing defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator, and just bombs as a head coach. But with Helton, I was curious to see if a different environment and a place where he could kind of focus more on just being a coach would do better than at the USC circus. And so far so good. And I know, especially for those who are unfamiliar, Georgia Southern among programs is probably one of the most underappreciated fan bases in terms of how wildly passionate they are about their program. And I don't want to say like as a G5, because that just seems insulting. That's just like, just in general. That was one of the things that struck me the hardest when I started covering college football more seriously in 2015 is how serious they are in Statesboro and the tradition they have of success over many seasons there, particularly as they rose up and then joined FBS and found themselves to be competitive almost from the beginning, actually right from the beginning. But I just wanted to add that. John, I see your hand up. I want to get your thoughts on this, and then we'll head over to Jack as well.
Yeah, well, I guess first thing first. Yeah, I definitely agree. Georgia Southern has a great chance of winning the on this side of the Sun Belt. And I mean, I know Georgia State's getting all the recognition right now for being undefeated, but I think Georgia Southern has a very impressive play so far this year. I know the Wisconsin loss was hard, but that's still a very good team we lost to. But I mean, I think a respectable amount considering the circumstances going all the way to Camp Randall. I know, Bob, you guys were talking about G5 schools that looked impressive. I think, Bob, I agree pretty much with you with most of them, with the Sun Belt and with Fresno State and I think Air Force. I just want to throw a shout out to the MAC schools as well. I know it's kind of top heavy of a conference this year, but man, the top heavy is doing really well on the non-conference side. It's been really impressive to see some of these teams go out and go out and beat the big dogs of the of this division. So I'm really curious of how they play the rest of the year and how they really show up for bowl season.
Oh, I agree. I'm a real fan of Ohio right now. Ohio's, that really close loss to San Diego State, which actually over time has seemed a little bit stranger, only because San Diego State has seemed to have slowly come apart a little bit more than people expected. But they beat FAU, which again Jack's team, but then went on the road, beat Iowa State. So suddenly it seems like, I mean, of course, the MAC is one of the most cannibalistic conferences there are. They will just have a team that does not show up on a particular week, or a team that just seems to play out of their minds. But between them and Toledo in those divisions, I think those are the two clubhouse leaders, and I'm very curious to see how this develops out as the season progresses. If we're looking just at the MAC teams, because again, Toledo had that close loss at Illinois. And otherwise, they've had no problem taking care of business. So it's going to be interesting to see if that's what it boils down to, and we get a repeat of a conference title game. Jack, I know you wanted to add something to any of the stuff we just discussed.
Yeah, man. Oh, first off, that Ohio's loss at San Diego. Don't forget, there should be a little asterisk to that because Curtis Rourke, that was his first game back since tearing his ACL, and he only played half of the first quarter because he got injured again. Ended up not playing the next week. Of course, our luck. His first week back was in Boca Raton to play FAU. Ohio's the real deal, man. They have a top 10, if not top 5 defense. They held the Owls to 5 yards rushing. That's stupid. That's stupid. Clemson didn't even do that with our 4th and 5th string running backs playing. Ohio's the real deal, and they have not won a conference championship since what, 70s, 60s? Do you have the number in front of you? It's ridiculous.
I don't have it in front of me, but they've been absolutely cursed when it's been coming to just getting close to it and just not quite getting there. And they had that problem with just and I mean, obviously Tim Albin was there, but also I can't help but think of all those years under Frank Solich, who I thought made them competent, made them a solid program, and there just always would be some random game Ohio would drop and just not quite make it all the way. So they are in my mind the team that in the MAC that always challenges and just falls short every time, and you can never. Yeah, it's inexplicable, and part of it's just that what I talked about with the MAC, they just seem to cannibalize themselves, but they are the ones that seem to always get the brunt of it.
Yeah,
but yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I'm just again. I mean, I think they should be undefeated, just like how Wyoming very well could have been undefeated. They're on their second string quarterback when they were in Austin, and they fought with the Longhorns, who a lot of teams are really high on this year, all the way until the end. I mean, if they had their starter playing, I mean, who knows? And the Cowboys from Laramie can play some serious ball. Ask the Red Raiders. Ask the Mountaineers from App State. Sorry, I don't know where Tim went, but being a Georgia Southern fan, he's obviously not too high on App State. I mean, just incredible G5 ball all the way around. Again, don't want to sleep on Toledo. More so disappointed in South Alabama, the Jaguars over in Mobile. Troy, a little bit. That win against Western Kentucky last weekend, highly entertaining. Hail Mary to end the first half for Troy. Absolutely beautiful. And I just want to give one more shout out, kind of keeping in the Sun Belt. Georgia State does look good. Darren Granger, probably the best quarterback that the national media hasn't talked about yet. But Georgia Southern, that loss, 21-point loss at Camp Randall, not great. And I know no fan wants to hear this, but I haven't seen a team look as good yet lose by 21 points as the Eagles did against Wisconsin. And I think that really solidified how serious Georgia Southern is going to be. I think they proved that game. I think they played Ball State and handled them easily last week. I think Southern's the real deal. And not a lot of people are talking about them in the East. JMU, State, who else is over there? I'm trying to remember now. Oh, Marshall. Dude, how the frick are we forgetting about Marshall? I hate Marshall, but they look great, man. They look good.
Yeah, they do. Absolutely. And you're right. We totally forgot to acknowledge how that, because I mean, I remember years ago, because at this point it's gotten to be too longer than I care to admit. In law school, I went with a guy who had played in college football. He played at Marshall, and he said there was no team they wanted to be. This is 20 years ago, but there was no team they wanted to be more than Virginia Tech. And to see them go there and get that victory, and Virginia Tech is looking pretty awful right now. But that was a huge deal for them. But again, going back to that Wisconsin game, though, when you throw 5 interceptions, that score being, is I think indicative of the fact that, had they not had 5 turnovers like that, I think perhaps it would have been closer. And when they didn't, and they had a solid game against Ball State, you see exactly what happens. You just see complete domination there. But, I see we have someone actually up here. The Water Boy, you actually covered, because it's sort of funny, you covered the San Diego State-Ohio game for us. What's on your mind, man?
I did. I covered that. Plus, I also covered the Bowling Green Michigan game. So I've seen multi-MAC games. Earlier, you said you think the Aztecs have kind of fallen apart from where we thought they were. I actually thought they played better than I thought they were against Boise in that loss to an average Boise team. So I didn't think much of the Aztecs, but I do believe the other guy was right. That the fact that the quarterback went down for Ohio was a turning point in the game. Ohio wasn't the same on offense, but I do believe in the MAC you're ultimately probably looking at Ohio versus Toledo in like some sort of a conference championship game, and then being tradition, Ohio will lose and Toledo will probably win.
Yeah, until they prove otherwise. I can see that. Sorry. I can see that.
Sorry for that Ohio fan there.
With San Diego State, I think you're right. I think maybe I was being a bit harsh. We'll see how they do. I mean, Boise State, they lost closely to what seems to be an average Boise State program, and maybe they're another program that might start taking a really hard look at the head coaching position, because they're certainly not the Boise State that seemed to be terrifying from the 2000s onward, ever since Dan Hawkins. I always love to go back to Dan Hawkins because that was when I noticed Boise State, and Chris Peterson took over for it when Hawkins went and flopped at Colorado. But those were some years for them. But if Boise State can, if San Diego State can simply go and beat Air Force this week, then yeah, sure, I'm sure people will start looking around. So there's certainly an opportunity for them.
I don't think they will, and I think that much like you were just saying there, I think San Diego State needs to start taking a look at their coaching situation with Brady Hoke and the lack of any kind of like quarterback production really under his watch. And until their quarterback play improves, they're going to just and their running game isn't like the running game that we've seen in years past. They're going to continue to stumble and look like a 500 type college football team.
Speaking of stumbling, before I forget, I wanted to also just acknowledge one of the funnier moments that I don't know if everyone had a chance to see, but during the Colorado obliteration by Oregon, there was actually a really funny moment at the beginning of the game. So they're getting onto the field. The Oregon Duck came out, and most people I'd seen references to the fact that the Oregon Duck came out in a cowboy hat and shades, kind of emulating Dion. But he comes out, and they put up like a clock that said, the joke was it was prime time. So it was supposed to represent Deion Sanders, and he destroys it with the sledgehammer. It's always cute because, as we know, it's Donald Duck, except, Walt Disney gave permission for that to be the Oregon Duck. While he's smashing it, there's video of him hitting it so hard that the dude flipped the head right off the mascot. So it's one of the funnier moments I've ever seen. Brian Floyd, I think, was able to upload a video of it. But just watching the Oregon Duck, the guy, I mean, you feel for the guy. He panics. He hits this prop so hard with a sledgehammer, his own head flies off. And you just see the little, because then the proportions get totally warped. You can't quite make out his face, but you see this brunetted little head popping out of the duck costume. And it's just, you can tell he has a moment of just sheer panic. And he runs right back in the tunnel. The head was like 2 feet in front of him. He could have probably grabbed it, but clearly his instruction was, if your head flies off, get out of there. And it wasn't like I don't know if they do it like they do at Disney parks, where everybody who's a cast member in a suit or whatever they call it when you're one of the folks playing one of the Disney characters, they have like a handler or someone who's kind of their spot person to keep them out of trouble and keep people from attacking them from behind because you can't really see in those things. But yeah, it's one of those funny moments watching this guy run out, this poor guy run out because the head flew off the duck, which I hadn't seen in a while. One of the funnier moments years and years ago during the NCAA basketball tournament, the Oregon Duck got into a fight with actually the Utah Swoop, like their mascot. This is, I think, before Utah was even in the Pac-12. They got into such a fight that the referees ejected the two mascots because they were literally wrenching each other on the ground and ripping each other's heads off, which is glorious. And I mean, if anyone who knows these kind of mascot fights has to also acknowledge two of the other great moments when the Oregon Duck, I don't know who was in the costume, but did some really offensive things to the Houston Cougar, to the point where like they had to be separated by the cheerleaders, had to like grab the Oregon Duck and pull him off of the Houston Cougar. And then there was, of course, another moment where, I'm getting too much of the mascot stuff. I want to let someone else up as well here to have a conversation. I see Gamecock Superman, one of our regulars. I'm going to go ahead and let you up here as well. By the way, another great moment. There were so many funky moments this week. There were a number of great moments, but we were talking about James Madison. But if you also haven't seen this crazy moment, James Madison, they were already in the lead. They were up 24-0 at this point, but they got so upset about it was against the Utah State. They were so upset about the fact that they thought a player went out of bounds. And again, the head coach just wasn't thinking, because you're not allowed to do this. One of his assistants or one of the staffers showed him on his phone like evidence that the guy had stepped out. So the coach, like while he's yelling at the ref, grabs his phone and shows the screenshot of the player stepping out. You're not allowed to do that. Like, unlike the NFL, you can't have any of these. You can't have a tablet. You can't have anything on the sideline. And the ref was within his rights to eject the coach or penalize him. But to be fair, the ref is clearly angry, like furious. But doesn't eject the coach, just kind of like takes his hand and tosses the phone to the side, says like, I don't care. You can't do that. But again, it's one of the wilder moments. I think, those great guys at Art But Sports. There's this one gentleman, and I've traded DMs with him. He's a financial planner or something that really just loves art and loves football. But he got the treatment where he made a reference to a Cezanne painting that had the same resemblance of the pleading of the JMU coach to please look at my phone. Which actually, to be honest, as we've gone on, I'm a little bit wondering why we can't have these things on the sideline. Is it that big of a deal? But one other wild incident that happened in college football that wasn't as well known as the Ryan Day Lou Holtz feud, which we can of course get to later. But Texas State was again hosting Nevada, and Nevada's been awful. We know that. But someone apparently on the Texas State band threw a trident at the Nevada football players, which, I mean, when you how do you even when you see this reported, what do you even say? But apparently it was a prop trident, so obviously this wasn't like Brick from Anchorman, like actually killing somebody, but getting ejected for throwing a trident. And people were like, why do the Texas State Bobcats even have tridents? And again, this is where the advantage we have of one of the team that runs the Reddit or CFB Twitter account actually did some work at Texas State and was familiar with it. San Marcos, the town that it's just outside Austin that contains Texas State. I guess it's the mermaid capital of Texas. Again, this gets more absurd as I say it out loud. But so San Marcos is the mermaid capital of Texas. So apparently tridents were on the sideline of Texas State. And one of the band members decided to hurl one at the Nevada team on the sideline as they were all, just having the usual kind of smack talk that you see. So again, that's by far one of the stranger stories you'll probably hear that happened in college football in a week that had so many strange stories that I think a lot of this stuff got lost. But Gamecock Superman, you've been very patient. What's on your mind, my friend?
How's it going, man? It was a great weekend of college football. The Missouri game or the Mississippi State game was electric. I was there, first sold out SEC game of the season. And my question to you is, after watching the game, where would you put Xavier Legette as a serious, Bolitnikov candidate this season?
He is an electric player, and the advantage of having such a good quarterback to throw to him is definitely elevating it. So they build off of each other. That's absolutely, I think, no doubt there, because Spencer Rattler has really been, I think, a solid quarterback in every game. I mean, even in losing efforts, you see that talent. So to have that kind of Rattler to get, ability has elevated both of them. So Jack, did you have something on this specific one? I see your hand up, and I feel like you wanted to actually chime in here.
Yeah, love Xavier. I think he's one of the most underappreciated receivers in the nation. He was like number 6 or 7. I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me. Forgive me. When it came to total yards, earned or caught, whatever it is, I'm not sure. Last week, give me a second, I'll pull it up. But I mean, the SEC East is pretty stacked when it comes to receivers this year. Really, really impressive. I'm impressed with Luther Burden from Mizzou, how he handled Memphis defense last week. I just pulled it up. Okay, I'm so sorry. Xavier Legette, 189 yards on 5 receptions. That is stupid. That is stupid. 2 scores? Are you kidding me? Yeah, he's really impressive in the SEC East. They're just stacked. There's Luther, 7th place. So Xavier Legette was 6th place in the nation in yards for receivers. 189. Luther Burden, Mizzou, 177, but on 10 receptions. Number 1, if anyone can tell me where the number 1 receiver is last week, you get a cookie. I don't know.
Would it be Rome Odunze, the guy from Washington? Odunze? Is that how you say it?
You would think, but according to ESPN, he's not even in the top 10 for last week. This is just over 1 week period for like last week's games. So over the season, he's probably there. I mean, And when you have someone like Penix throwing you the ball, I mean, doesn't he could be in Tacoma instead of Washington? He'll be fine.
Yeah,
But
that's a
my
whole side story in and of itself. Washington looks like they could be a number one team, and people just
Oh,
haven't recognized it yet. But,
they're
but go ahead. Sorry about that.
my next sort of question going off of that is obviously there's a big matchup in Neyland Stadium, Tennessee versus South Carolina. Last year, we all know the story. Tennessee was a one-loss team coming into Columbia Williams-Brice Stadium, and they got absolutely annihilated, embarrassed on national television. Their fan base, is still mad about it, and they've been saying all year that this game has been circled on their calendar and they want to blow us out, beat us 100-0. My question to you is, who do you think wins in this situation? And do you think the whole revenge game angle is sort of overplayed with this and people, thinking that this is just going to be easy win for Tennessee at home?
I'm not sure I would ever say it's going to be an easy win for Tennessee at home. I do believe that motivation is going to be in there, especially after Tennessee, well, they couldn't get over the curse of Gainesville, and they lost again in the swamp, despite seemingly being a much stronger team than Florida going into that. And maybe to some extent that'll be when people look back. That's when Florida started to turn its season around very early on. But I would lean towards giving Tennessee the edge right now, being in Neyland, being a team that is competent, and again, let's just say that was Gainesville voodoo. They looked extremely competent again against a UTSA team that, as I mentioned before, was disappointing. UTSA seemed like they'd be a much stronger program this year, and it hasn't quite materialized. But I revenge is a good motivation, or it's just, and you're right. I mean, could it end up being a pointless, endeavor for them? I'm not sure, but I do believe in that kind of revenge factor. If hopefully, I mean, for a team that's seeking revenge, it doesn't manifest in being clumsy and just losing your focus. But Tennessee, I would have to give them the edge right now, especially at Neyland. And I expect if it were going to be a game, it would be a closer one. It would be um, Spencer Rattler, again, as I've said, has impressed me and continued to impress me. So if it is a victory or a loss, I don't think Rattler is going to cost the game for them. I think it's going to be a question of whether South Carolina can keep up, at least on defense, with what Tennessee is going to be throwing at them, because Tennessee tries to find that identity there.
Yeah, I mean, I would tend to agree. As a South Carolina fan, obviously, I believe that the line currently sits at a 12.5 right now. I believe Tennessee sits as a 12.5 point favorite. Nothing I have seen from Tennessee so far up to this point would indicate that I think that they're going to cover the spread. So I would say, as far as betting this game, I'd probably take South Carolina and the points. But certainly Neyland is a tough stadium to win a game in, and South Carolina has not done amazing work there. For many years previous to this. So I'm hoping for a win. It would be a huge win if we got it done again. And, I am looking forward to the game on Saturday night.
Jack, I know you wanted to have a follow-up on this.
Yeah, Bob, if you don't mind, and then after this, I'm going to have to call tonight and edit our podcast. Gamecock Superman. I mean, y'all played UGA really well. Game was in Athens. Is there really that much difference between Athens and Knoxville when it comes to a Neyland and everything else? When it comes to game day experience, USC's been in this tough environment this year. I wouldn't want to bet against Rattler at all, and the wide receivers that he has there. So Tennessee, yeah, they looked good against UTSA, but UTSA, they didn't have Frank Harris. Obviously, it was more so like UTSA's defense couldn't stop the Vols. The Roadrunners still have Rashad Wisdom, probably the best safety that, again, the country doesn't really recognize, and he's been a top safety at the G5 level and in the nation for years now. I feel like the guy's been in school longer than me, and trust me, that's a long
Yeah,
time.
Frank
Boy,
Harris.
it's
He's
a
been there
long
for
time.
7 years, I think, at this point.
Yeah, it's yeah. I mean, UTSA they've had these guys for a while, but I wouldn't. USC looks all right. I'm not going to say that you know. What I'm trying to say here is I'm with Gamecock Superman here. I think USC can do it. I think they might even be live. Um, I think if there are fans that are saying Tennessee are going to blow them out, I don't see it right now. I think he should keep the faith. And that being said, I'm going to call tonight. Bob, thanks so much
Hey,
for
what
having
was your
me, man.
podcast again? You should let us know really quick.
Oh, brother, you are too kind, man. Okay, so as of right now, it's FBS Campus Tour. It's new. It's been an idea we've had for a long time. We're probably going to change it to something like FBS 134, something of the sort. Because we're going to name drop all 134 teams for now, 133, I should say, in every single episode. And we don't. And we all probably know of CFB Campus Tour, right? One of the best Twitter accounts. Dude is living the dream, going to all these college football stadiums. So we want to make sure that he can get all the love that he deserves while we try to figure out what we're going to name our own thing. So appreciate you allowing me to kind of name
Oh,
drop that. I
absolutely, man.
appreciate that.
Thank you so much for joining us. That was awesome.
Yeah. See you next Tuesday.
Absolutely. Hey, Nate, we're happy to see you again. How's it going?
Bob, doing great, man. Thanks for letting me come up and chat again. Man, I'm like so disappointed that I missed the whole thing. Hopefully, you guys are going to talk for a little bit. I know it probably won't go on too much longer, but yeah, I was at a one of my best friends is a head volleyball coach, and my other best friend, his daughter is playing for his team this year, so I went and watched their volleyball match. So got back here late. It's just been a long day, and I'm sitting here and I'm like, oh my gosh, I forgot it was Tuesday. I need to jump in Bob's space. So yeah, appreciate you jumping me in. Let me in. I know I probably missed the whole show. You guys covered so much stuff. I'll ask a kind of a curveball question. We can spend time on it if you want to. If not, that's all good too. But I know there's a heavy schedule this weekend. There's a lot of important games. I can't wait to watch Georgia Auburn, obviously. But the game that I think I'm most intrigued with, or one of the most intriguing games, is not this weekend, but next weekend when Oklahoma is playing Texas. Because in my opinion, if Texas wins that game, which I'm not saying they will, because Oklahoma's good too, but if Texas does win that game, when you look at the rest of their schedule, do they essentially kind of write their way into the top four teams, or do they? I think they become a top four team for playoff contention if they beat Oklahoma all the way up until when um, championship games start. So just want to
Oh,
throw a little
I
tidbit
agree
out there.
with you.
Yeah,
I mean, Texas, if they
yeah,
can, and again, I know the water boy wanted to mention this because obviously we have to
I
acknowledge
do.
that there is a very meme popular game that's going to be coming up for the Longhorns this weekend with Kansas. Both ranked, 4-0 Kansas. What a heck of a nice start for them. Lance Leopold is legit. Regardless of however things go, it's amazing. I think I forgot the last time that they opened the season, like two back-to-back 4-0 seasons for the Jayhawks has been a long time. But I'll let you. But before I get into that, Water Boy, I know you wanted to add something about this.
Well, yeah, before we jump ahead a week, we have to look at this week's upcoming game. It's the Reddit CFB game of the year. A ranked Kansas versus Texas, a number 3 Texas. I mean, this is it's beyond meme. This is our Reddit Super Bowl. And so we can't skip ahead a week in Texas. We have to look at Texas, Kansas, and I want to hear what you think about Texas, Kansas this upcoming weekend.
I think Kansas looks nice. I think they're I think they're going to be able to qualify for a bowl again this year. I'm hesitant to say that they're going to upend the, especially in Austin. I think Texas looks too strong. I think I want to go with Nate here. I think if they can get through that and then are able to, whoever takes over that Red River Showdown in the following week is going to have the lead in the Big 12. And I again, at this point, Texas seems like the stronger program. Oklahoma looks good. They do. The defense, I mean, compared to last year, finally looks like it's clicking there. But I think just overall, the talent level and the weapons that are currently being employed by Texas give them that edge. And if they can get past Oklahoma, I think they have a pretty smooth. Okay, if they can get past Kansas, I will say it. If they can get past Kansas and if they can get past Oklahoma, it looks like a pretty smooth run for them. And then at that point, I feel way more comfortable saying that we can easily pencil them in for the playoff. And kind of a quick note there. So RCFB since like 2010 apparently, which is long before I ever was even on Reddit, but we've had a poll, and a poll that's actually pretty good. I mean, I say this not to toot our own horn, but because I have nothing to do with it, I don't even vote in it. I just don't have the time. But there's one of our members, Sir Gippy, has put this poll together, and he's been doing it for now. It's in their 13th or 14th year, and it's 400 voters, and it's been very fascinating because these 400 voters, they have to apply. There's always a couple of thousand applications, and he tries to build a poll that's kind of balanced with fan bases. And it's almost always kept really close to the AP poll, just because when you get that many people voting, despite all of their different versions of it, it usually comes fairly close. Not exactly, but nothing so outlandish that it becomes like a joke. This week, it was one of the weird. I mean, it has not been a chaotic poll like this since 2015, when a lot of people thought mid-season that Utah might be a dark horse champion, which obviously didn't pan out. But for 2 weeks, Utah was at the top in 2015. But this week, the poll is so bizarre, but at the same time, completely plausible. It was really cute, and frankly, we were flattered to see Ralph Russo, who's the head of the AP poll. He doesn't vote in it, but he's the one who organizes it. He thought it was an interesting poll as well because Texas is number one in this poll. But in terms of first place votes, Georgia, which is ranked number 3, has triple the votes, first place votes of Texas. And, again, Washington's number 5. They have more votes than Ohio State in the first place votes than Ohio State at number 2. And it just kind of shows what I think a lot of, again, if you listen to a lot of what some of the other talking heads, I mean, I'm talking folks, who are paid the big money to talk college football, it's really hard to peg who the top 10 are right now. And I think our poll, being as chaotic as it is, with a number 1 team that has a third of the first place votes as the number 3 team, it just shows you that right now I don't know if you can clearly say who the top 4 are right now. Is it Texas? Is it Ohio State, Georgia, Michigan, Washington, Penn State, Florida State? Whoever emerges from or whoever else might emerge from any of those conferences seems to have a shot. And this is not a year where it feels like this is going to be, especially the SEC being weaker. This isn't the year where we're like, it's going to be Georgia, Alabama, or LSU. Maybe all 3 will make it into the playoff or something like that. This seems to be one of the most subject years. I seem to have gotten a lot of people raising their hands. Go ahead, Nate.
Bob, real quick on that, because we were going back and forth. Gamecock, obviously, it's you after. I just throw a quick snippet in here. Awesome point. The amount of talent that's like in the Pac-12 and just different conferences other than the SEC this year, because of Alabama's problems, the LSU loss at the beginning of the season, FSU coming on strong, Utah. I mean, like with their schedule, and there's no way anybody could tell you who the top 4 is definitively until we get through easily this weekend. And I would say as we get through next weekend, we'll have a better roadmap. But right now, it's great for college football. The landscape across the whole nation, with the West being so much better than it's been in the past, I think it's great for college football. So I'm looking forward to watching. And I'll tell you what, I turn on the TV at 7 in the morning. I read, and then I'm watching SEC Nation. I watch College Game Day. And then I watch football until the West Coast games are over. So great for college football. Thanks, Bob.
Absolutely, 100%, Nate. And Gamecock Superman, and then John. What's going on?
So yeah, talking about this week's slate, one game I'd like to, or 2 games actually, I'd like to bring your attention to. You probably already know, is this Friday we have Utah and Oregon State. Obviously, Oregon State, Washington State was a pretty good battle there. I wasn't able to watch it because I was at the South Carolina game, but do you believe that Utah is going to win this game, because I think if they do, it'll solidify them as sort of that number 4th team in the Pac-12 outside of Oregon, USC, and Washington that could, can potentially compete for the Pac-12 title. And also another question I have is, what's the status on Cam Rising, the Utah quarterback, because he's been out since the beginning of the year.
Well, Cam Rising, it's amazing to think what Utah has done without having Cam Rising, because what they did to UCLA this past week, I mean, their defense is just relentless. And granted, UCLA has a talented quarterback, but he's a freshman, and they just decided to sack him relentlessly, as you do if you go and play in Salt Lake City, especially against that Utah defense. Apparently, Cam Rising is taking some reps. I don't know, again, where he's at, if he's going to start, but he seems to be improving, which will only make Utah more of a terror in the Pac-12. But I think that's a really interesting call for that Friday game, because Oregon State lost pretty handily to Wazoo. The score ended up, there was some garbage time scoring, which made it look a little closer. Wazoo is the team that now suddenly, at least in the Pac-12, is the one that could be that 4th team, because they have a great quarterback there. And it was a big deal last year, but it was ignored because he came from Incarnate Word. That was a big deal. Incarnate Word's head coach became the offensive coordinator for last season for Wazoo, and came with his quarterback, who had won the top quarterback in the FCS the previous year. And that is who they have right now. And that clearly, just Oregon State being an otherwise strong team, especially on defense, couldn't stop them. But it'll be interesting to see where Utah fits in that pecking order based on this game. If Utah wins, and I think, they're still in that race to be the number 4 team, battling with Wazoo. And again, maybe they're the number 1 team at this point. Perception-wise, they'd be battling with Wazoo for that 4th spot. But if Oregon State manages to rally, then Utah, maybe we start reevaluating where a lot of these teams are. Another Friday game, by the way, before I forget, that I'm interested in, only because they're one of the under the radar programs right now, is Louisville, because they're undefeated, 4-0, 2-0 in the ACC. They're going on the road to NC State. We're actually going to have a reporter at that game. I'm really curious to see how that goes, because there's several unranked undefeated FBS teams. Syracuse is the other. I'm not sure where they're at right now. Kentucky is another one. But Louisville, I really want to see how they do, because they're the sneaky one right now, in my opinion, in the ACC, where I'd be very curious to see. Because I remember when we had Matt Fortuna, who's a great reporter, who's now kind of he's independent right now with his own website. But I actually asked him in the AMA, I was like, well, I think Washington, at least in the top 10, is the most underrated of the really top contenders at the moment, because they their offense is unstoppable. They've just been manhandling teams. But I think among the undefeated teams that aren't ranked, Louisville's the one that I'm just most curious about, and I think they get the least amount of conversation. John, what's on your mind?
Hey, man, I just wanted to bring this up because I know you mentioned it earlier. I don't want to make sure this got brought up before we end it tonight. I'm kind of curious what your thoughts about Ryan Day and the Lou Holtz beefing. I don't understand. I don't understand Ryan Day beefing with a 86-year-old man who hasn't coached in 20 years. It's just we talked about it. It's a weird weekend. I feel like we can't skip that one.
Yeah. I have a really, I'm going to go really quick on that, because I know a lot of folks have talked about it. I actually think it's hilarious, because when I heard that after the game, I'm like, is he cutting a wrestling promo? This sounds like, I grew up in the 80s, so I'm just thinking, I still call it WWF. I'm like, this is a W with that beard that obviously we love to joke about because it's so perfectly black. Yeah, I'm like, this is getting into a classic pro wrestling promo, and I'm all for that. With Deion, I would love to now see Ryan Day and Deion Sanders get into like cutting promos at each other. Obviously, Dan Lanning kind of lost. I wouldn't say lost his cool. That's an insult, but he definitely got a little bit annoyed with everyone asking him about Deion, and really seemed to take some glee before the game in definitely being the team that upset that finally derailed the Deion train there. But all of these, and obviously Deion Sanders himself is part of this. He's just a personality, and love it or hate it, he certainly gets attention. Like, I don't mind this stuff. I mean, I prefer that to, and I'm going to say this, as an alumnus, I was horribly embarrassed by what happened at USC with, they banned one of the reporters. I forgot. I think it was the OC Register, one of the major papers that covers USC sports, and it was just an embarrassment. They had to walk it back, and it was kind of a shocking one, only because again, USC, their new athletic director, they got her from Washington, and she's considered very good at what she does. She's recently on the job right now, but again, yeah, Jennifer Cohen. So this seems to be like Lincoln Riley being Lincoln Riley, because he famously was very sensitive about this stuff at Oklahoma. You can't do that in Los Angeles. I mean, Los Angeles, okay, the nice thing about being in Los Angeles, it's not quite New York, but college sports still gets it's still far back. It's not the prominent part of sports stuff, Jerry Buss, the Lakers, the late Laker owner, was famous for just being smart about that. He's like, I will not get into a battle with people who buy ink I will never get into what's the saying? It's like, I'll never get into a pissing match with people who buy ink by the barrel. So that was Jerry Buss, the late Lakers owner. His opinion on, he just would deal with the press and fine, just deal with it. Like what Lincoln Riley did there. Well, I don't know if it was Lincoln Riley, but given some of the things that had happened at Oklahoma, that was foolish. So I prefer seeing what Ryan Day did. And again, with Lou Holtz, I mean, okay, yeah, he's 86, but it's Lou Holtz, and I saw the quote. He's definitely out there, and it stuck with him. And maybe it's just the way Lou Holtz talks, or maybe the fact that, who knows, maybe Ryan Day looked up to him at some point. I'm not going to say, but I think Lou Holtz being a head coach and unabashedly a Notre Dame fan, and I'm never going to fault him that, because I've seen coached there and coached the national championship there. But that got into that. I think he pressed the button that has clearly been bugging Ryan Day a lot, and whether or not, even Ryan Day said, look, we had one bad half against Michigan, and everyone thinks we're like a soft team. They clearly weren't on Saturday. So I think that was him letting that all go. I think what surprised me more was it kept going in the post-game presser. To be fair, I'm pretty sure someone asked him that, but to hear that quote that kept going was kind of a striking one. Nate,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
2 cents on that real quick, and everybody else can say whatever. I thought it was super weird, Ryan Day. I thought to have Lou Holtz get under your skin that bad, and the game was really close. And here's the point I want to make: if that clip doesn't happen with Ryan Day, the story would be the 10 people on the field with Notre Dame. Freeman obviously addressed it, and there's been a lot of like side talk on college sport radio, like Mad Dog and all that, which was addressed really well. But I think that the story got missed because of Ryan Day's weird comments, because not having 10 people on the field instead of 11 on the play where it didn't get stopped. I think that was the bigger story. But Ryan Day just acting kind of, and I'll just say it, like douchey. I thought it was just super weird. Like, I can't believe that he lets Lou Holtz dictate a victory interview in the way that he did. Super corny. And I know I'm a Georgia fan, and people could say, oh yeah, you're saying that because you hate Ohio State and all that. That's fine. But dude, it's not just me. All of college football was like, what is Ryan Day doing? I thought it was like really, really weird. So that's it.
If college football heads that way, I don't know if I'd mind it, to be honest. I think I might be okay with it. But let's see. I see Gamecock, Superman, and John, you have your hands up. And then I know I let up Andy, and I'll try to get to the three people that have requested before we wrap this up. And we might move a little quicker. But I just wanted to let you, Gamecock, Superman, go ahead. What was your thought?
Well, sort of going off of that, going off of Dan Lanning's comments about Deion, do you feel that, what Dan Lanning did to Colorado was disrespectful, and, he was being a bully, as some have said in the media? Because
I think that's a bit over the top. I think Dan Lanning certainly was just trying to motivate his team in the beginning. I think the quote is, Cinderella story's over. They're fighting for clicks and we're fighting for wins.
Well, I'm not mainly talking about his comments necessarily. I'm just talking about the fact that they, went for they literally faked a punt inside their own 20, got it, drove down the field and scored a touchdown while up, 2 or 3 touchdowns. Like,
Well, I think they wanted to make a point, and only because this was probably going to be. I mean, there's some strategy to this because let's say you're Oregon right now. You want to. You're dealing with the fact that you've got so many other teams in your conference. You've got your top 10 team, but again, the Pac-12. I swear, they've got top 10 teams, but they're not as closely paid attention to as I still think they get that kind of issue, and then maybe a chip on your shoulder, like you got to get everyone's attention. You have to do that. And after, games against Portland State, Texas Tech, Hawaii, this was really the chance for Oregon to get everyone's attention before they play Washington in a few weeks. So I don't think it was unsportsmanlike. I think they just wanted to show everyone, like, look, they knew the attention that was coming for this game, and they were right because it was one of the most watched games. There's some argument if it was number 1 or number 2, which is, again, amazing when you consider they were competing against that Ohio State Notre Dame game. So this was the chance to get a lot of influence and show what Oregon football can do. Because last year they fell flat immediately because unfortunately their opening game was with Georgia, and Georgia was Georgia, and they just couldn't. Oregon was, for the rest of the year, everyone was kind of wrote them off. This was their chance to be that. And I'm going to be honest, as a fan of the University of Southern California, I was kind of hoping it was going to be USC this week. That got to be the team that pantsed Colorado. Not because I dislike Dion, but because I just thought, like, boy, everyone's going to love that game. Everyone's going to love the team that does that. And Oregon took full advantage of that. And to be fair, Colorado, I mean, I don't think losing Travis Hunter was a huge hit, but I think part of the problem is they just haven't. They're a strong team. They're a strong middle team, but they were never gonna be able to stand up to some of the more established programs with depth. And Oregon was that, and we saw exactly what I think people expected was going to happen when Colorado in this initial season went up against that. And I'm not going to be stupid and write off Dion for that one game. I think, we're seeing the limits of what you can do when you replace most of your roster. You still got to build up the line. You still have to build up talent that can maintain and keep it up. But again, I'm not shocked by that, but I don't blame Dan Lanning
to that point. I think another thing was, the trash talk by the Colorado players to, the Oregon sideline before the game and sort of their antics. And I expect for, this week against Southern Cal at home for the antics, so to speak, to be turned down a little bit. And I just don't think it's Lincoln Riley's style to get into a, public pissing match in the media with another head coach.
He would just shut down the reporters. That's his his MO. But
yeah. One other point on that too, between the two. I mean, Dan Lanning is a defensive-minded coach. Lincoln Riley is not. So I think that for Oregon, it makes sense why they came out so hard and their defense destroyed Colorado. I think we all saw that coming. At least, I think the majority of people did. I think the USC thing will be a little different. I think USC is going to play solid offense. Colorado is going to want to respond. But Lincoln Riley's problem is the defense, where Dan Lanning, in my opinion, he's solid. So just a dynamic.
No dispute there. Hey, John, what's going on? Let's have your thought, and then let's get to Andy.
Yeah, I was going to wrap up. Was you're mentioning Lou Holtz and Ryan Day. I think at the end of the day, really, you even though it's Lou Holtz, you're still smack talking 86-year-old man. That's a no-win situation for you, no matter what no matter what's going on. Also, real quick for we go on to the next person. Shout out to Diego Pavia for a new way of disrespecting your rival school. I don't know if anyone saw that, but I was.
Oh, is that New Mexico State? The New Mexico State guy?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, he got videotaped. I think was by his own teammate urinating on the practice field logo for New Mexico, and I love it. Somebody leaked the leak is how it was, I think, shared in a few places. But yeah, that was definitely a creative one, and to let alone have it revealed. What a mess. What an awkward one. Andy, you've been super patient. What's on your mind, man?
So I've got a couple questions. I know that we don't quite know about the four that are going to get to the playoff, or at least a decent guess. But I wonder, do we know like a top 12 or like a top 10 somewhere on there?
Boy, yeah. At this point, well, top 10 or 12, that's a pretty huge chunk of folks. And I think that's part of what I think is making next season so attractive. And actually, just one quick note before I forget, one of the other interesting stories was the commissioner of the American, Oresco, said he's now fine with this, all because they want to alter it. It was originally going to be 6+6. The six of the top conference champions, which implicitly means you'd be taking the top conference champ from one of the G5s, as well as six at-large teams. But with the Pac-12 imploding, that kind of made it questionable. So now Oresco is apparently fine with this concept of a 5+7, where it would be the top five conference finishers. So the remaining four, SEC, Big Ten, ACC, and Big 12, along with whoever the top team is from the remaining conferences, which would be implicitly the five G5, and then with seven, at large teams. So, but again, going to what we're looking at here with who would be my 12 finishers, I mean, I'm not going to say the top 12 of like the AP or something like that, because some of those are going to inevitably play each other. So at this point, I'll go with inertia. I will say Georgia is one of the ones. I think Texas is in that mix. I think they seem to be the ones that currently in my mind are leading that Big 12. Michigan and Ohio State, either one of those, or both, they've done it before last season, so we'll have to say that. Florida State, after beating Clemson, that keeps them in there. Boy, Penn State's the hardest one, though. I think that those three, I mean, Penn State, we saw what they did to Iowa. They didn't play down to Iowa. They just crushed Iowa and potentially crushed Brian Ferentz in the process, because as some of you may know, he had to keep up, I forgot, was it 25 points over the season? Getting shut out, I think he has to hit like now at some point like an average of 28 points per game, which is just not feasible to supposedly keep his job. Somebody got his father, the head coach, to say that he needed to maintain that kind of a points per game. But it looks pretty hopeless after Penn State shut them out. So I do like them a lot. So I have trouble putting them in there. Now with the Pac-12, I think it's going to be, USC, I'm iffy on them. And I say that because Alex Grinch, defensive coordinator, still hasn't taught them how to tackle, and I don't know why. And everyone knew it was a problem, and it's still there. So I'm going to go with Washington there at this point. Maybe Wazoo, because I think they are the more dominant team. And then SEC, other than Georgia, it's more open. I don't know. Who would I take between Alabama or LSU? That would be a tough one at this point. I'm more impressed, or at least more confused than I ever have been about that conference. But that was an interesting one, Andy. I really appreciate you adding that to the conversation. I want to keep us moving only because we're slowly running out of time. We typically go for an hour, and we're at hour 15. But Scott, you've been really patient. I see your Go Dogs. What's going on? What's on your mind, my man?
Nothing much. I actually wanted to chime in. I have a few friends that are not insiders, but close enough to the Buckeyes program. They kind of know the history behind it. And I wanted to chime in on that, make a joke at Kirby's expense because his acting prowess is pretty bad. I was going to ask if you could send over a Trojan actor or, acting class for my man during the Ford commercials because it's pretty rough right now. But yeah.
Is it as bad as Ed Orgeron when he was at Ole Miss doing the Hummer commercials? Because those were legendary.
You know what? I need to rein it in if that's what the baseline is, because that was pretty bad. But Ryan Day really looked up to Lou Holtz. He already is the kind of guy that takes stuff personal because his predecessor Urban Meyer was one of the few coaches, in that northern area that quote unquote mimic the SEC blueprint of physicality. It always seemed like a lot of people shied away from playing Ohio State, simply because they were one of the few teams that built from the inside out, very pride themselves on line of scrimmage play, things like that. And when Lou attacked the one thing that Ryan Day is already super sensitive about, which is physicality, being able to hang tough, especially because he's, recently 0-2 against Michigan, it really dug deep. I know a lot of people close to them that were saying that was something they really, really harped on. And, it's just been one of those criticisms that Day's not been able to shake off. Some of it for good reason. Some of it I think is over exaggerated. But the way he hung on to it, instead of just having that passionate response, getting the PR train kicked up and saying it's Ohio against the world, getting the fans involved, the way he kept going on, you can tell that's kind of Day's, I don't want to say personality. I don't know the guy, but you can tell it really, really hit him deep. And that's just something like Lou Holtz, in all seriousness, and I've been told this, that he's one of the few coaches at Ryan Day, if you could hang up a picture of him on the wall, he would. And
and that makes a lot of sense. And again, I think you nailed it, because clearly that was. And again, I think Lou Holtz became the avatar for all of the critique. And some folks who I respect have said that this is just proof that, again, head coaches do actually listen to what's said about their team. Some of them say they don't.
He listens to a lot.
Oh, he
and
clearly does.
And that's something that he truly needs to dial back, because, listen, I hate defending Day, especially as a Dogs fan, because I do think a lot of the criticism's legit, but he is a first-time coach. But he goes out of his way to get into where his name's being utilized, what Ohio State's kind of media narrative is, and where they're at. I also wanted to say this, speaking of good games this weekend, I know the Gamecock down there is definitely, excited about the Tennessee South Carolina game. I really think that's one I'm going to circle on the chart, obviously after, Deep South's oldest rivalry, because I think Spencer Rattler's dealing. Now, granted, he's playing behind a high school offensive line, but he is absolutely slinging that thing.
Absolutely. I think you're going to get a lot of an agreement here. I want to get to a few more thoughts on out here. Let's see. Ski Mask Smurfy, I know you disappeared and reappeared, but I know we've had you. And let's see, I'll try and get to Cody, and then we'll probably wrap up. Get to Ski Mask Smurfy. Hey, what's going on? What's on your mind, my friend? Oh, Ski Mask Smurfy. Sometimes there's a time delay and people don't hear their name. No, don't worry. I realized exactly what happened. For those in the audience who are unfamiliar, once you get led up onto the stage, you may not realize that there's a time delay, and then suddenly it'll cut like 10 seconds and you'll just be live. So that's what happened to Ski Mask Smurfy. He actually didn't hear me calling him. What's going on, man?
Oh yeah, I don't know. Right now, I feel like the way things are shaping up, especially with now having three of the Power Five getting rid of divisions to declare their conference championships, I think this season could end up being another 07-08 BCS mess where maybe picking the top four could end up being not as easy as we think it should be. Because with the way things are lined up, a lot of teams could end up being just one loss or maybe two losses going into their conference championship game. And then that team who's maybe undefeated or has one loss could lose to that team. And then we're all just going to be sitting there wondering, wait, so who do we pick to go through this? Everybody's record is probably going to stack up being pretty even. And especially with the SEC not being as good as it has been. So there's definitely going to be not two SEC teams. So I think it may be a wide open gallery to end the season.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we're going to see it's hard to see. I think it's possible that we're going to end up with that kind of a scenario, and more so than usual. I'm wondering if we're going to get into the 2007 zone. I'm not going to say that. Anytime anyone says we're 2007, it never ends up being that way. And I apologize. I just want to go ahead and at least get one more caller in this, because I do want to slowly wrap this up. Let's go ahead and let up Cody. And while Cody's coming up, Scott, I actually saw your hand up earlier. What did you want to add to this?
Oh, well, I think it goes to show why expansion's needed, because the Pac-12 is clearly the best of the Power 5 conferences in terms of top 5 in depth. And I feel like we're going to be punishing cannibalization in a 4-team when, there could be potentially 2 teams of the Pac-12 that deserve it, but because at some point one's going to knock off the other, or there's going to be a loss that we have to judge with no way to really weigh it, which loss is worse to which team, and no one-to-one comparison, I think it's going to get complicated. I totally agree. I don't think 2007 quite yet. I think teams are growing and the better teams are emerging. But with the SEC being almost in full rebuild across the board, I mean, the most experienced quarterbacks being Daniels, Rattler, and KJ, it's pure chaos down here. So you have the ACC again, 3 teams. Miami could potentially knock off one. Duke could be, upset the apple cart. It's going to be extremely, extremely interesting. And the good news with the Big Ten, the East side decides itself, because all the big 3 play each other. So we'll know the way they go. Normally the ACC figures itself out, but the Pac-12, I almost feel bad for in a way because they're playing really good football. And it's just a matter of, okay, well, what do you weigh more?
Yeah, great football in their last season, no less. I mean, this is just, I mean, it's a heck of a swan
Mm-hmm.
song for them. You know, I want to let Cody speak, and then let's see, and then I'll get to you, Ski Mask, Smurfy. What, Cody? What's going on, man? It's been a minute.
Hey guys, thank you for having me. Greetings from a hot Arizona still. It is still pretty hot here. Don't come here yet. So I had a question and maybe your thoughts. I was at the USC game in Tempe last weekend, drove up for it. Not the game I was expecting, but we got the win anyway. So I wanted to bring up probably an unpopular opinion throughout the college football world, and I totally get it. What I'm about to say may sound ludicrous. I do believe the defense has improved compared to last year. Yeah, there's still some of the same issues I see with the tackling and all that. But man, you cannot deny that defensive line is crazy good. And I think with the team we have this year, with Caleb Williams, this might be our best chance to win a championship for the next, I don't know, 2 to 3 years. I'm not sure a Malachi Nelson or a Miller Moss will lead us there. I just think we have a generational quarterback that could carry us into the national championship. Just want to hear your thoughts on
Well,
that.
I completely agree about Caleb Williams. I mean, it's crazy. Even in the game where USC just seemed like off, and it's so funny if folks only saw the final score 42-28, it was that game was very close until the end. It just kind of USC finally broke free in the final minutes. Arizona State kept keeping it within one score, and it looked like because within our CFB we have a little banner where if a top 10 team loses, we'll put a sort of an intentional vandalism of whatever their logo is. We started doing it years ago and we keep it up. We were getting ready for that. We were like, oh, well, maybe we can put the Arizona Sun Devil with a Trojan helmet on. Like we were literally already in the middle of designing it because the fourth quarter was just so close in a late game. And then again, USC came forward. Caleb Williams, even in a so-so game, had some just insane plays that just show what level of talent the guy has. But and I think you're right to an extent, because when you compare it to the Stanford game, was just ridiculous. That first half, I honestly, it's been a long time since USC looked that dominant against a team as they did the previous week. So maybe Arizona State decided to just come back after that. But again, Arizona State the previous week shut out at home by Fresno State. There's so many, and yeah, Jaden Rashada was knocked out and he didn't play again against USC. So there's so many factors in what exactly happened in the desert. All I kept thinking of watching the game and watching USC struggle against an Arizona State team that looks like this is just going to, unfortunately, it's going to be a complete rebuilding year for them, was this is the same stadium where Lane Kiffin coached his last game at USC, and then when they arrived back, he was tarmacked, as he famously was, left on the tarmac at LAX. And part of me was wondering, well, if USC manages to lose this because the defense just doesn't seem to know how to stop seems like a very weak Arizona State team that had just been shut out, then is this going to be Alex Grinch's tarmac game? Or do they just leave him in Tempe on the tarmac there? Sorry, this plane is for people currently employed by USC. Or, I mean, I could think of a lot of warped things I could have twisted that one. But, USC has a defense gotten better. I think so, because gosh knows what we saw against Tulane and Utah to end last season was horrific. Like that didn't even make sense that a Pac-12 program that had gotten that far could feel the defense that bad. But I'm not sure. I think people were still hoping to see a significant improvement, especially considering how quickly USC's offense turned around with a couple of key players. But again, a defense is a little more than that. Maybe that's just sort of that's kind of an illustration of that. But man, I'm curious to see how it looks against Colorado. That's for sure.
I think it's important, Nate. I'm sorry to interrupt. I'll let you get your thought in just 1 second. I think it's important that Kenny also did take over play calling that week for USC, and it definitely showed. Like, I will give Arizona State the full credit. They brought out all the tricks and flowers to this game. Like, much respect to Arizona State. They fought their ass off. I think we can't deny that, and I think Arizona State is in good hands, especially going to the Big 12. I think they're going to be a problem in the Big 12 in the next 5 years or so. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And then for those who may not be familiar, Kenny Dillingham, their head coach, was the offensive coordinator for Oregon last year. And then before that, he had been offensive coordinator for Florida State for a couple of years before, again, because Dan Lanning's first season was last year. That's why he was at Oregon for only a year. And yeah, no. So again, that could very well be a very good indication of why Arizona State suddenly became way more potent than they had been that disastrous previous week. Nate, actually, let's Ski Mask Smurfy. I know you had your hand up earlier, and then we'll go to Nate, and then we'll slowly wrap this up.
Where is it? Sorry.
No worries.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about what Cody just mentioned, and it sort of ties into what I was going to rebuttal with Scott. Is that, yeah, Cody, I think USC does have a chance to contend for the championship this season because, like I said, like a few of us said earlier, things are very close and very tight knit. And it just reminded me, we forgot, last season, 3 of the Power 5 conference champions all had 2 losses with Clemson, Kansas State, and Utah. And, that sort of set things up perfectly for the SEC to have 2 teams. But look at how weak the SEC is this year. If USC or anyone in the Pac-12 can just hold on and have 1 loss, I see them having a good chance of being in the playoffs and contending. Thanks.
Absolutely. Nate, what's your thought?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't going to go much on this. I thought, trying to transition because I know you're trying to tone it down. If you want to add more comments before I did my final comment, feel free. I just had a little snippet that I wanted to say before you close the space down.
No, absolutely. Go right ahead. We'll probably close this down pretty soon. So all you, my man.
Yeah. Appreciate you letting the space go longer. I could talk about college football for 5 more hours, and I know Scott in here could do the same. Scott and I have talked many times lengthy about college sports. Good to see him up here. He has a wealth of knowledge, by the way, when it comes to college football in general. But my comment is the game that I'm looking forward to the most this weekend, obviously Georgia, that's going to be that way every weekend, but it's the 6:00 game, Ole Miss, LSU. I think that game has such gravity, mainly because, obviously we saw Ole Miss lose to Alabama. LSU has already lost to Florida State. So whoever wins that game, they're a bigger piece to the puzzle in the West. And if it's LSU, LSU still got to play Alabama. But if LSU loses, then it gives that bigger card to Ole Miss because then they take down LSU, but they lost to Alabama. So guess what? Alabama then becomes a key player in the West again. So the point is that game to me has a lot of importance in terms of what takes place in the West. So I'm really looking forward to see how that game plays out because we all know SEC football it is a little. I would agree that it's more down than we've seen in a while. That game holds a lot of value for does Alabama kind of rejuvenate themselves, get more clout as we roll further along in this season. The other thing is, though, whoever wins that game, if it keeps playing the West down, then it opens up more doors for, let's just say Georgia hypothetically is still like the number 1. It opens up more doors for the 3 and 4 if Ohio State or Michigan is the 2. And I think there should be more doors opened up based on what we're seeing across the whole landscape. So I think that game is so important, and I appreciate you letting me expand upon that.
Absolutely, and that is an interesting game, and I'm very curious to see how it goes. I think LSU has more to lose in that game than Ole Miss. I'm very curious to see how, because Ole Miss seemed really disheartened after losing that Alabama game because they made such a big deal about it. Lane was leaning into the most laniest moments of being a troll towards his opponent, and then they fell flat because Alabama's defense suddenly became Alabama's defense, as we always tend to know and fear it. And despite the offense, still we're figuring it out. That Alabama defense was ferocious and just held them to 10 points. I'm going to go ahead and slowly wrap this up. Just wanted to say a couple of other quick things if you haven't had a chance to see. We're talking about Caleb Williams. One of the funnier bloopers of this last week was Caleb Williams at one point, the offensive line, the center just wasn't paying attention, hiked the ball, and absolutely nailed Caleb Williams in the breadbasket. So you actually see a very comical moment. Caleb Williams leans forward like Simpsons Hans Molman getting hit in the ball in the crotch with a football. It was that kind of a moment. So you see the future NFL pick just completely bowl over for a second. And then I have to mention Louisville. We were talking about that. I'm very excited to see how that game on Friday looks because they're undefeated and unranked, but they seem to be sneaking up on people. They had no trouble with Boston College, who has returned to earth after, again, we talked about it last week. I am convinced when they do those red bandana games, BC becomes a totally different team, and they nearly upset Florida State. But they were at Louisville. There's a play where, again, the defense is rushing the backfield, and literally a Louisville player decides to do a cartwheel, and does a cartwheel in the backfield as he's running into the back. I've never seen anything like it. During a live play, the guy just decided, hell with it, I'm going to do a cartwheel way off on the side in the backfield. Worth looking up. Kind of the other, again, just sort of, I'm amazed we never got a chance to talk about the fact that Jimbo was apparently on the field in the middle of a play. For those who missed it, Auburn got a scoop and score while Jimbo, again, and that's part of the reason why. I don't think Jimbo expected it. A&M was on offense. So I don't know why, because, some of the coaches have those handlers, the stay back man who sort of grabs the coach, sometimes by a belt, sometimes by their shirt, and keeps them from getting a penalty from running onto the field. Somebody lost. I mean, again, the defense lost their man, so Jimbo ends up on the field. The returning Auburn player runs right by him, and the commentators never mentioned it, at least during the live play, which, again, one of those striking moments. I also wanted to bring up one of the better stories, or one of the funkier ideas. And Ross Dellinger, I always love his work. He's at Yahoo now, kind of reporting on what's going to happen to this Pac-12 Mountain West. Are they going to merge? Are they going to do something like that? What's the future of the Pac-2 or the Tupac? There's this interesting they're so willing right now to look at radical ideas to save a conference that there's a theory, and this is one that's purely theoretical before. It's not the first time I've heard it. The idea of having the Pac-12 and the Mountain West actually kind of do this semi-combination where they actually do within those two conferences a Premier League promotion relegation system where top teams would be in the Pac-12, but then there would be some rapid movement between seasons of who's in the Pac-12 and who's in the Mountain West. It's a wild idea. I think it's a little too wild to work in the system that has been built up in our college football system, but I just wanted to acknowledge it because I've never seen it seriously talked about at any point. One of the other stories that might have gotten lost, Ohio State's athletic director Gene Smith was giving testimony to Congress about the NIL landscape. And he quoted, and again, when they say it in Congress, they usually are serious about this. Apparently, it's become, quote, common for potential prospective college athletes to ask for $5,000 simply to visit a campus. So that one definitely caught my attention. We know NIL is getting bigger and has changed the sport, but imagine now to take an official visit. No, you pay me. On a positive note, and especially with all the chaos that's happened at Iowa State, preseason they had all the mess with the gambling controversy and the investigation that's going on. They had one of the best NIL promotions I've ever seen. Look up Iowa pork producers. On Twitter, they're Iowa pork, but you can probably just look up Iowa pork producers, Iowa State, because somebody figured this out, and apparently they were willing to lean into it. There are 4 players on the Iowa State roster, and their names spell out purchase more ham and bacon. Purchase more ham and bacon. So it's purchase, it's more. One guy, he's the name that's it's like HAMANN, but it's Hammond and Bacon. They have a guy named Bacon. So they're posing their backs to the camera. So you see that sentence spelled out in front of a pile of Iowa pork product. So that is by far one of the funnier NILs I've seen in ages. And as someone who did their graduate work at Minnesota, I have to acknowledge that the Gophers did the most Gopher thing I've ever seen. And losing overtime to Northwestern, the team that no one thought was going to win any games in the Big Ten. And not only did they lose, they lost in the most Minnesota way possible. See, I went to USC and I went to Minnesota, so I feel like I've got two extremes that kind of feed me here. But Minnesota was in the lead in the fourth quarter. Northwestern scores 21 unanswered points to take the game into overtime, where they win 37-34. That was, again, that'll take some of the PJ Fleck. I don't know how he's going to work in the long run, but I had to acknowledge that one because that was a classic Gopher moment. I didn't watch that one live. I'm kind of glad I didn't. I had a friend who was saying that this was going to be a blowout, like Colorado losing to Oregon. Boy, was he wrong. So again, I just wanted to throw that one out there as well. So on that note, this was our CFB Talk 159. My name is Bob Akhayeri. We do these every Tuesday night at 10 p.m. Live calls. It's always fun to hear from you here on Reddit, RCFB, on Twitter or X or however you want to call it. So on behalf of myself, on behalf of all of us, I wanted to thank everyone who joined the conversation. I wanted to thank you all for listening. Now I'm going to hang up and listen.